At Thanksgiving dinner, my husband said, "I'm selling our house. My girlfriend, your stepsister Cheryl, needs a bigger place." Our children sat in horror. I stood up, walked to my purse, and handed him an envelope. "Since we're all making announcements. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. It all started on Thanksgiving. Isn't that how it always is? The biggest betrayals seem to save themselves for the days that are supposed to be about gratitude. The cranberry sauce was still bubbling on the stove, a deep, jeweled red, sending little puffs of steam into the air that smelled of orange zest and cinnamon. It was my mother's recipe. The kitchen was warm, a sanctuary of sage and butter from the crisp November air outside. It was the smell of every happy memory I had. That's when Russell's phone buzzed. For the 7th, maybe 8th time that morning. I was wrestling with the 20-pound turkey, my arms straining as I tried to get a good grip on the roasting pan. Through the kitchen doorway, I saw him glance down at the screen. A slow, private smile spread across his face. It was a smile I recognized, one I remembered seeing directed at me a long, long time ago. It wasn't for me anymore. "Honey, could you give me a hand with the turkey?" I called out, my voice a little tighter than I intended. "This monster is about to slide right onto the floor." In a minute, he muttered, not looking up. His thumbs were flying across the screen, a frantic, silent conversation with someone who was clearly more important than the centerpiece of the meal I'd been planning for a week. I took a deep breath, the scent of rosemary filling my lungs, and managed to heave the bird onto the counter myself. A sharp twinge in my lower back reminded me, as it often did, that I was 48 years old, not 25. I'd been married for 24 of those years. I'd raised 2 children in this house, patched up scraped knees, hosted birthday parties, and built a life within these walls. And my husband couldn't be bothered to help me with the damn turkey. A familiar knot of irritation, one I'd been swallowing for months, tightened in my stomach. But I pushed it down. Today is about family, I told myself, a mantra I'd been repeating all morning. It had to be. My son, Forrest, had driven in from Chicago the night before. He'd arrived looking exhausted but handsome in a new blazer his consulting job required him to wear. We'd stayed up late, just talking at the kitchen table, and I saw the lines of stress around his eyes that he tried to hide. He was a good boy, a hard worker. My daughter, Meredith, had burst through the door that morning like a whirlwind of cheerful energy, her arms loaded with bottles of wine and a bouquet of autumn flowers. She was in her last year of grad school for environmental law, and she was brilliant and passionate and filled the house with a light that had been missing for some time. Seeing them together, sitting at the dining room table that was set with my grandmother's heirloom china, laughing about some old family story, it made it all worth it. For a little while, everything felt normal. It felt like us. The table looked perfect. I'd spent 2 hours on the centerpiece alone, a grand cornucopia overflowing with miniature pumpkins, gourds, and autumn leaves. I'd even found these little battery-operated candles that flickered so realistically. Russell had walked past my masterpiece 3 times that morning on his way to refill his coffee, and he hadn't said a word. He hadn't noticed. Or maybe he just didn't care. "Mom, this stuffing is absolutely incredible," Forrest said, his mouth full. "Did you put cherries in it this year?" I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time that day. "I did. A little something new." "To Mom," Meredith said, raising her wine glass. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked so young and happy it made my heart ache. For, once again, pulling off a Thanksgiving miracle. We all clinked glasses. And in that one, fragile moment, everything was right. This was the feeling I'd been working for, the warmth that seeped into your bones and made you feel safe. This was home. And then, Russell's phone buzzed again. A loud, insistent vibration on the polished wood of the dining table. He picked it up. His smile vanished. A different look crossed his face, annoyance, anxiety. "Everything okay over there, Dad?" Meredith asked, her brow furrowed with the easy concern of a daughter who still believed her parents' world was solid. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. He shoved the phone into his pocket. But his legs started to bounce. Up and down, up and down. A frantic, nervous rhythm that vibrated through the floor. I knew that bounce. It was his tell. I'd been married to him for 24 years. I knew all of his tells. The way he'd clear his throat just before delivering bad news. The way his eyes would dart around the room, never landing on mine, when he was hiding something. The way he'd unconsciously straighten his shoulders and puff out his chest, like a man bracing for impact, just before making some grand, self-important announcement. He was doing all three right now. The air in the room grew cold. "Actually," Russell said. He pushed his chair back from the table, the legs scraping a harsh, ugly sound against the hardwood floor. The noise sliced through the comfortable chatter, and an immediate, heavy silence fell over the room. Forrest and Meredith stopped mid-sentence, their forks hovering in the air. He stood up, clearing his throat. He looked, not at me, not at his children, but at a point on the wall just over my shoulder. He was addressing an invisible board of directors. "I have something to tell everyone," he announced, his voice carrying a strange, forced cheerfulness that sent a chill down my spine. It was his big presentation voice, the one that meant he had practiced these words in front of a mirror. My stomach didn't just drop. It felt like it had been scooped out with an icy ladle. "Russell," I said, and my voice was so small I barely recognized it. "Whatever it is, can't it wait until after we've had our pie?" He ignored me completely. His gaze remained fixed on the wall. "I'm selling the house." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Meredith's wineglass stop, frozen, inches from her lips. I heard the distinct clatter of Forrest's fork as it fell from his nerveless fingers onto his plate. The sound echoed in the crushing silence. "What?" Meredith whispered, the single word a breath of disbelief. But Russell was just getting warmed up. He was on a roll, a runaway train of destruction. "My girlfriend and her kids, they need more space. A real home, you know? Her little apartment is just too small, and the kids are growing so fast." Girlfriend. The word was an obscenity at my Thanksgiving table. It was a violation. Forrest's face had gone a ghostly shade of white. He looked from his father to me, his expression a mixture of confusion and horror. "Dad, what are you talking about? What girlfriend?" Russell finally broke his gaze from the wall, a flicker of irritation in his eyes, as if our shock was an inconvenience to his grand plan. He let out an impatient sigh. "My girlfriend," he repeated, as if we were all a little slow. "Cheryl." And that's when the world stopped spinning. Cheryl. Not some random woman from his office. Not a stranger. Cheryl. My stepsister. The timid girl who had come into my life when my father remarried. The girl I had taken under my wing, mentored, loved like my own blood. The woman I had helped through a messy divorce, the one whose children I had treated like my own niece and nephew. The woman who had sat in this very kitchen 100 times, drinking my coffee, crying on my shoulder, telling me how lucky I was. Meredith made a small, strangled sound, like she was choking. "Cheryl," she repeated, her voice shaking. "Aunt Cheryl?" "She's not your aunt," Russell corrected her, his voice cold and dismissive. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was erasing our family history, one sentence at a time. "And she needs stability. Her kids deserve a real home. So, I've found a beautiful place for them in Westfield. 5 bedrooms, big backyard, good schools. They're going to love it. What about us?" Meredith's voice was a tear-filled whisper. Her eyes, fixed on her father, were swimming with a pain so deep it felt like I was looking at my own heart breaking in her reflection. "What about Mom?" And then, finally, he looked at me. His expression was hard, defiant. He was braced for the storm. He was expecting the tears, the accusations, the screaming match. He wanted me to become the hysterical wife, to give him the justification he needed for this monstrous act. He wanted a fight, so he could walk away feeling like the victim. I took a deep, steadying breath. He was about to be very, very disappointed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a single tear. Instead, a strange and profound calm settled over me, like a sheet of ice forming over a raging sea. It was the kind of clarity that comes only when you've hit rock bottom and realized you have nothing left to lose. Slowly, with a grace I didn't know I possessed, I placed my linen napkin beside my plate. I pushed my chair back from the table, the movement deliberate and silent. The only sound in the room was Meredith's quiet, heartbroken sobs. Forrest was rigid, his jaw clenched so tight I was afraid he might break his teeth, his eyes boring into his father with a look of pure, cold fury. Russell just watched me, a smug, expectant smirk playing on his lips. He thought he knew what was coming next. He had no idea. I stood and walked from the dining room, my steps even and measured. I walked to the small mahogany table in the entryway, the one where I kept my purse. Every eye in the room followed me. I could feel their gazes on my back. I opened my handbag, the familiar worn leather cool beneath my fingers. My hands were perfectly steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. I reached inside and pulled out a single, crisp, cream-colored envelope. I had been carrying it with me for 3 weeks. Every day, I'd transfer it from one purse to another, a heavy, paper-thin weight. I had been waiting for the right moment. I hadn't known what that moment would look like, but I knew I would recognize it when it came. And this, I realized with a sudden, chilling certainty, was it. This was the worst possible moment, which made it the absolute perfect one. I walked back to the dining table. I walked right up to Russell's chair and placed the envelope on the table, right beside his plate of half-eaten turkey. I placed it directly on top of a greasy gravy stain he had made during his grand speech. I leaned in, just slightly, and met his confused gaze. My voice, when I spoke, was not a whisper, but it was not a shout. It was quiet, clear, and carried the weight of a final judgment. "Since we're all making announcements." And then, I turned, walked back to my chair, and sat down. I picked up my fork and knife. I cut a small piece of sweet potato casserole. I lifted it to my mouth. It tasted like ash and sawdust, but I chewed it slowly, deliberately. I swallowed. And all the while, I kept my eyes locked on the man who had just tried to destroy my life. The envelope sat there between us, a silent, powerful testament to a truth he had yet to discover. The smug smirk was gone from his face. The defiance in his eyes had been replaced by a dawning, flickering fear. He stared at the piece of paper as if it were a coiled snake. In that moment, the power in the room didn't just shift. It was a hostile takeover. And I was the one holding all the shares. Russell's fingers hovered over the envelope, a strange hesitation in his movements. The confident man who had just dismantled his family's future was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely afraid of a piece of paper. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. "What is it, Dad?" Forrest's voice was like ice. It wasn't a question of curiosity, it was a demand. His gaze was fixed on his father's face, a look of such profound disillusionment that it made my own heart ache for him. In the space of 5 minutes, his father had transformed from a hero into a villain. "Brenda, what is this?" Russell repeated, his voice a hoarse whisper. He was looking at me now, pleadingly, as if I might call it off, take back the mysterious object that had so thoroughly derailed his victory speech. I simply raised an eyebrow and took a sip of my wine. "You started this," my silence said. "Now you can finish it." Meredith, her face streaked with tears, looked back and forth between us. "Mom, what's going on? Are you okay?" Her voice was so small, so vulnerable. She was trying to make sense of a world that had just been turned upside down. I reached across the table, my hand covering hers. It was cold as ice. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I promise." And to my own astonishment, it was the truth. The months of anxiety, of sleepless nights, of feeling a constant, low-grade dread, it had all vanished. In its place was a cold, hard certainty. Unable to bear the suspense and the piercing stares of his children any longer, Russell made a cowardly move. He snatched the envelope off the table and shoved it into the inside pocket of his jacket, unopened. As if hiding it would make it disappear. The look of relief on his face was almost comical. "Aren't you going to open it?" Forrest pressed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Later, Russell mumbled, fumbling for his water glass. "It can wait." The beautiful Thanksgiving meal I had worked so hard on sat cooling on our plates. The air, once filled with warmth and laughter, was now thick with resentment and unspoken accusations. It was suffocating. I decided to help it along. "So," I said, my voice conversational as I cut another piece of turkey. "How long has my stepsister been helping you make decisions about our shared assets?" Russell's fork slammed down on his plate. "Brenda, for God's sake, not now." "Why not now, Russell?" I asked, my voice still light, still calm. "Seems like the perfect time for honesty. Or should we wait until after you've hired movers to pack up my belongings? After you've given my sister a key to my front door?" Meredith let out a sob and pushed her chair back. "You're really doing this?" she cried, her voice cracking with pain as she stared at her father. "You're leaving Mom, for her?" "It's complicated, Meredith," Russell said, falling back on the classic, meaningless excuse of a guilty man. "No, it's not," Forrest said, his voice dangerously low. "It's really, really not." Just then, Russell's phone, which he had placed face down on the table, began to buzz again. The vibration was loud and angry in the tense silence. Everyone stared at it. He glanced at the screen. I saw the name flash for a fraction of a second. Cheryl. Even now, after he had blown up his entire family for her, she couldn't give him a single moment of peace. "Answer it," I said, my voice quiet. "Don't let us hold you up. She's obviously your priority." His face flushed a deep, mottled red. He jabbed at the screen, declining the call. It's a work thing." Meredith let out a laugh that was more like a bark of pain. "Work? On Thanksgiving? At 7 o'clock at night? Does Aunt Cheryl work with you now, too?" The phone buzzed again. And again. A relentless, demanding summons from his new life. Russell's composure was completely gone. He was twitching, his hand repeatedly going to his jacket pocket, feeling for the envelope as if it were burning a hole through the fabric. "You know what?" Forrest said, standing up so abruptly his chair nearly toppled over. His napkin fluttered to the floor. "I've lost my appetite." He fixed his father with a look of such withering contempt that even I flinched. 24 years of marriage, Dad. 24 years. And you do this. You announce you're leaving Mom for her own sister at Thanksgiving dinner like you're giving a damn quarterly earnings report. Forrest, you don't understand the situation. "Oh, I understand the situation perfectly," Forrest cut him off, his voice like steel. "You decided your little midlife crisis was more important than Mom's dignity. More important than this family. More important than anything." He turned and walked out of the room without looking back. A moment later, we heard the heavy, final sound of his bedroom door slamming shut upstairs. Meredith stared at her father, her young face a mess of tears and disillusionment. "Daddy," she whispered, the childhood name a dagger to the heart. "How could you?" For a fleeting second, I saw a crack in Russell's armor. A flicker of genuine pain at the sight of his daughter's grief. But then his phone buzzed again, a fifth time, and the mask snapped back into place. The moment of humanity was gone. This time, he answered it, turning his back to us. "I can't talk right now," he hissed into the phone. But it was too late. We could hear Cheryl's sharp, whining voice through the earpiece, demanding and insistent. He hung up, but the damage was done. The last thread had been cut. That night, alone in our marital bed for what I knew would be the last time, I couldn't sleep. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. It was replaying a 15-year-old movie, a story I thought was a heartwarming tale of a blended family, but now realized was a horror film in disguise. I remembered the day my father sat me down to tell me he was remarrying. It had been 10 years since my mother had passed from cancer, and while the news was a jolt, I was happy for him. His fiancée, Sandra, was a sweet, gentle woman, a widow herself. She had one daughter, Cheryl, who was 10 years younger than me. I remember the first time I met Cheryl. She was in her early 20s, quiet and watchful, with big, sad eyes. She seemed so lost. My heart went out to her. My own mother was gone, and I knew the pain of that loss. I made it my personal mission to make her feel like a part of our family. I took her under my wing. I helped her decorate her first apartment, gave her my old, reliable car when she needed one, and told her over and over, "You can think of me as your big sister now." She played the part of the adoring younger sibling to perfection. She was always full of compliments. "Oh, Brenda, your house is so beautiful," she'd say. "And Russell is just the best husband. You are so lucky." She looked at my life, the life I had built with Russell, with a kind of hungry admiration that I mistook for affection. Years later, when her own short-lived marriage fell apart, I was the one she called at 2 a.m., crying hysterically. And, of course, I told her to come stay with us. "You and the kids can stay as long as you need," I had said, without a moment's hesitation. She and her 3 young children moved into our guest rooms for 2 months. It was chaotic, but I was happy to do it. That's what sisters do. Russell, at the time, seemed like a saint. He was so kind to her kids. I have vivid memories of him in the backyard, patiently teaching her 6-year-old son how to throw a baseball, pushing her 4-year-old daughter on the swings for what seemed like hours. I'd watch from the kitchen window, my heart swelling with pride. What a good man I married, I'd think. So kind and compassionate. Now, the memory of his hands on the back of that swing, pushing my niece, my future replacement, higher and higher, made me feel physically ill. During that time, the boundaries began to blur in ways I failed to see. She started calling him for everything. A flat tire. A leaky faucet. Advice on her divorce settlement. "Russell is just so smart about these things," she'd gush to me. "He's a real man, you know? He just handles things." It was always framed as a compliment to me, to the wonderful man I had chosen. I see it now, of course. I see the calculated campaign she was waging. Every sigh about her own struggles was a subtle dig at my good fortune. Every compliment about my husband was a way to get closer to him. Every plea for help was an excuse to insert herself into the fabric of our lives. She was the patient, smiling serpent in my garden, and I had been the one to hold the gate open for her, completely blind to the poison she carried. The real unraveling began about 9 months before that Thanksgiving, though I was in such deep denial I refused to see it for what it was. It started with the classic signs, the ones you read about in magazines and think will never happen to you. The late nights at the office became more frequent, always blamed on a big project or a demanding client. Anniversary dinners were cancelled at the last minute because of a work emergency. He started guarding his phone with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its treasure. If he left it on the coffee table and I walked past, he would tense up. I tried to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach. "He's just stressed," I told myself. "His recent promotion has come with more responsibility." I made excuses for him because the alternative was simply too terrifying to consider. The first concrete piece of evidence arrived on a rainy Tuesday in a pile of junk mail. It was a credit card statement, and I almost threw it away, but the address window caught my eye. It was addressed to Mr. Russell Davison and Mrs. Cheryl Peters. Peters was her married name. My hands started to shake as I tore it open. It was a joint account I knew nothing about. The charges painted a sickeningly domestic picture. Weekly trips to the grocery store. Purchases at Carter's and the Children's Place. A charge for over $600 at a store called Little Dreamers Furniture. I felt a wave of nausea. He was buying bunk beds for her boys. Meanwhile, I had been the one juggling our finances, trying to figure out why we were suddenly struggling to cover the mortgage on time, why our savings were dwindling. He had told me his new salary structure was complicated and that his bonuses were being deferred. Another lie. I confronted him that night, the statement trembling in my hand. He didn't even flinch. He launched into a smooth, practiced explanation. "Oh, that," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Poor Cheryl is having a terrible time with her ex. He froze her bank accounts. I'm just helping her out until the lawyers can sort it out. I put my name on the card to help her credit." The explanation was so plausible, delivered with such earnest concern for my poor, struggling stepsister, that I almost believed him. I wanted to believe him. So I let it go. The final, undeniable proof came from my own daughter. It was a sunny Saturday in July, and Russell had told me he was flying to Denver for a mandatory, weekend-long work retreat. That afternoon, Meredith called me, bubbling with her usual cheer. "Hey Mom, you'll never guess who I just saw at the park near my apartment," she said casually. It was Dad. He was with Aunt Cheryl and the kids. It was so cute, he was pushing her little girl on the swings, and she was giggling her head off. The world tilted on its axis. My blood ran cold. He's in town?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Yeah." I almost went over to say hi, Meredith continued, oblivious to my turmoil. "But I don't know, Mom." It seemed kind of intimate. The way she was looking at him. It felt like I would be interrupting something private. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I lied, the words tasting like poison. He probably just ran into her. "You know your dad, always happy to help out." After I hung up the phone, I sat in the silent living room for hours, the afternoon sun fading to gray. There were no more excuses. There was no more denial. It was all true. The late nights, the secret credit card, the work trips. My husband wasn't just having an affair. He was living a complete, parallel life. A life where he played the doting father to another woman's children, to my own sister's children, while his own family was being fed a diet of lies. That was the day I stopped being a wife fighting for her marriage. That was the day I became a woman preparing for war. The Monday after Meredith's phone call, I didn't cry. I got organized. I spent the entire morning in my home office, printing bank statements, credit card bills, and taking screenshots of Cheryl's social media. Her accounts were private, but she had accepted my friend request years ago, and in her arrogance, had never thought to remove me. She didn't post pictures of Russell's face, but she posted everything else. Pictures of her kids eating ice cream at a parlor I knew was Russell's favorite. A picture of a new patio set that looked suspiciously like the one I'd seen on our secret credit card statement. She captioned it, "So grateful for my generous benefactor who is making our house a home again." It made me sick. With a thick folder of evidence in my hands, I made an appointment with the most ruthless and most expensive divorce lawyer in the state, Clayton Richards. His office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, all dark wood and polished chrome, with a view that screamed power. I sat across from his vast mahogany desk and told him everything. I didn't cry. I laid out the facts, the timeline, the evidence, as if I were presenting a business proposal. He listened without interruption, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. When I was finished, he gave me a long, appraising look. "Mrs. Davison," he said, his voice calm and precise. "Your husband has been exceptionally foolish. But men like him, successful, charming, arrogant, they are very good at controlling the narrative in a courtroom. He will claim these were all loans to a family member in need. He will paint you as jealous and vindictive. Our greatest weapon is not this evidence. It is the element of surprise." We spent the next 2 hours mapping out a strategy. Clayton's team did a deep dive into our finances and uncovered what I had suspected. Years ago, Russell had convinced me to sign legal papers that put our house and most of our major investments solely in his name. He had sold it to me as a smart move for tax and inheritance purposes, a way to protect our assets. In reality, it was a way to consolidate his power. It was a mistake that was about to cost him everything. Clayton drafted a thick stack of documents. They were brilliantly designed to look as boring as humanly possible, filled with dense paragraphs about family trusts, asset allocation, and setting up the kids' college funds. Buried deep within that stack, on page 37, was a simple, one-page quitclaim deed. A document that would legally transfer full and sole ownership of our family home from Russell's name to mine. That evening, I found Russell in the den, engrossed in a football game. I walked in and placed the stack of papers and a pen in his lap. "Honey," I said, my voice dripping with the casual sweetness of a dutiful wife. "Clayton says we really need to get these estate planning documents signed. He says it's the best way to protect the kids' inheritance from any future liabilities." I used the legal jargon Clayton had coached me to use. He grunted, annoyed at the interruption. Yeah, okay. Just show me where to sign." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I had placed bright yellow "Sign Here" tabs on 5 different pages. He didn't read a single word. He just scrawled his name on the designated lines, his eyes flicking back and forth between the paper and the television screen. He signed away his home, his most valuable asset, with less thought than he'd give to ordering a pizza. "All done," he said, handing the stack back to me, his attention already fully back on the game. "Thank you, darling," I said, my voice perfectly steady. I took the papers and walked out of the room. The next morning, before the sun was even fully up, I was at the county clerk's office. I watched as the clerk stamped the deed, the sound of it echoing in the quiet room like a gavel falling. It was done. The house was mine. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the rat to walk into it. The week between that horrible Thanksgiving and the day Russell finally opened the envelope was the longest week of my life. We moved through the house like ghosts, occupying the same space but living in different worlds. The air was thick with unspoken words. He was jumpy and irritable, clearly thrown off by my calm demeanor. He had expected a war of words, a dramatic emotional battle. Instead, I gave him silence. And it was driving him insane. I watched him, from the corner of my eye, as he'd pat his jacket pocket, feeling for the envelope, a nervous habit he couldn't seem to shake. Finally, the following Thursday morning, the suspense became too much for him. I was in the kitchen, calmly making pancakes for myself, when he appeared in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was a mess, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was clutching the cream-colored envelope in a white-knuckled grip. "Brenda," he said, his voice a low growl. "We need to talk." "What is this?" I carefully flipped a pancake, the sizzle filling the tense silence. I didn't turn around. "It's a set of documents, Russell. Open it and find out what they say." I heard the violent rip of paper as he tore the envelope open. I heard the frantic rustle as he unfolded the documents inside. Then, there was a long, terrible, absolute silence. It stretched on for so long that I finally turned around, spatula in hand. He was staring at the quitclaim deed, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He was paper white. He stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. You transferred the deed. I leaned back against the counter, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I did, I said, my voice as calm as if we were discussing the weather. 3 months ago, actually. It's amazing how much important paperwork goes unread when you're busy building a new life with someone else's family. You set me up, he hissed, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and dawning horror. This whole time, you knew. You planned this. I protected myself, I said, my voice hardening. After you made it clear you were planning to leave me with nothing. There is a difference. The house, he sputtered, his mind clearly struggling to process the full implications. But Cheryl's expecting. We've already been looking at furniture. We have plans. Cheryl is expecting a house that was never, ever yours to give, I said, setting my mug down on the counter with a sharp, final click. Funny how that works, isn't it? As if summoned by a dark magic, his phone began to ring, its cheerful tone a jarring insult in the charged atmosphere. We both looked at the screen. Cheryl. I watched as the last bit of color drained from his face. The moment of truth had arrived. He had promised her a kingdom he no longer owned, and now, the queen was calling to check on her castle. He fumbled with the phone, his hand shaking, and answered on the 4th ring. His voice was a pathetic imitation of his usual confident tone. Hey, babe. Cheryl's voice was so sharp and clear I could hear every word from across the kitchen. Russell, thank God you answered. I've been thinking about the timeline for the house sale, and I think we need to move faster. The kids are just so excited about their new bedrooms, and I saw the most perfect sectional sofa online. When do you think we'll have the paperwork signed and can make an offer on the Westfield house? Russell's desperate, panicked eyes met mine. I gave him a sweet, pitying smile and turned back to my pancakes. He was on his own. Actually, Cheryl, he stammered, his voice cracking. There's been a complication. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. When Cheryl spoke again, her voice had lost all its sweetness. It was a dangerous, icy whisper. What kind of complication? Russell took a shaky breath. It turns out, he said, the words barely audible. The house, it isn't technically in my name anymore. What do you mean it's not in your name? She shrieked. It's your house. You've lived there for 20 years. He looked at me, a silent, helpless plea on his face. I ignored him, humming softly to myself as I slid a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate. Brenda, he finally choked out. Brenda transferred the deed. Months ago. Without telling me. I just found out. The explosion on the other end of the phone was a thing of terrifying beauty. Her voice climbed to a pitch that I was sure could shatter glass. A torrent of vitriol poured through the speaker. Words like betrayed, incompetent, manipulated, and lying, pathetic snake filled my quiet, sunny kitchen. So let me get this straight, she finally screamed, her voice dropping back into a range that was merely furious. You promised me and my children a home that you never actually owned? I have wasted months of my life on a pathetic, cheating husband who doesn't even have a plan? You are useless. The line went dead. Russell stood frozen, staring at his silent phone as if it had physically struck him. He slowly looked up at me, his face a hollow mask of defeat. She hung up on me. Shocking, I said, drizzling maple syrup onto my pancake. Who could have possibly predicted that a woman whose main interest was financial security might lose interest the moment the money disappears? The days that followed that confrontation were a blur of delicious, righteous chaos for him, and quiet, steady progress for me. Cheryl, true to form, unleashed a digital firestorm. A barrage of texts, each one more venomous than the last, detailing his failures as a man, a provider, and a schemer, before she blocked his number on every platform. He was completely cut off. He tried, pathetically, to win back the affection of our children. He left long, rambling voicemails for both Forrest and Meredith, full of self-pity and flimsy excuses. They didn't call back. Forrest finally answered on the 10th attempt, and the call was brutal and short. I was in the next room and could hear Forrest's cold, clear voice. "You made your choice at Thanksgiving dinner, Dad. We've made ours. We're with Mom. Don't call me again unless you're calling to apologize to her." Then he hung up. Russell moved out a week later. I made sure I was out for lunch with friends when the moving truck came. I didn't want to watch. When I returned, the house was silent. He had taken his clothes, his golf clubs, and his favorite leather recliner. He left behind 24 years of photo albums, the rocking chair we had bought for Forrest's nursery, and all the ghosts of the life we had built together. I learned later that he had rented a small, soulless one-bedroom apartment across town. It was not the 5-bedroom mansion in Westfield he had promised my stepsister. The following months were about rebuilding. I met with Clayton regularly, and the divorce proceedings moved forward, now entirely on my terms. I started reclaiming my house, room by room. I donated his ugly recliner to charity. I painted our bedroom a calm, serene shade of blue. I started a yoga class. I had lunch with friends I hadn't seen in years. I was slowly, carefully, piecing my life back together. I thought the worst of the drama was over. I was so naive. One rainy afternoon in April, about 4 months after he moved out, Meredith called me, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Mom," she said, her voice low. "You need to sit down. Dad and Aunt Cheryl are back together." The coffee mug I was holding slipped from my fingers, shattering on the tile floor. "What? How is that even possible?" "I don't know," she said, her voice full of disgust. "He must have crawled back to her and begged. But that's not the worst part, Mom. He told me she agreed to take him back and marry him, but on one condition. They have to start trying for a baby. Immediately." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. A baby? Russell was 52 years old. But the urgency of it felt wrong. It wasn't romantic, it felt desperate. It felt like a transaction. I got my answer a week later, and it was uglier than I could have ever imagined. I was at the grocery store, picking up a few things for dinner, when I saw her. Cheryl. She was in the pharmacy aisle, her back to me, talking on her phone in a hushed, angry whisper. I ducked behind a towering display of vitamin bottles, my heart hammering against my ribs. I know it was wrong to eavesdrop, but I couldn't stop myself. "The custody agreement is ironclad," she was hissing into her phone. "My ex-husband's lawyer is a shark. If I want to petition the court to relocate the kids out of state, I have to provide proof of a stable, long-term change in circumstances. The easiest way to do that is to be remarried and demonstrate that my new husband and I are building a new, permanent family unit. A new baby is the fastest way to prove that. It's some archaic clause about family planning and financial stability." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was all a lie. It had nothing to do with love or forgiveness. It was a cold, calculated legal strategy. She needed a baby as a pawn in a custody battle with her ex-husband, a way to get what she wanted. And she was going to use my ex-husband, my foolish, broken ex-husband, as a stud to get it. And in that moment, listening to the poison in my stepsister's voice, I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a predator. And I was the only one who knew the one secret that could stop her. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting with the number 1 down below. It lets me know you've given me a thumbs up, and it tells me that you're with me on this journey. Your support means the world to me, and it gives me the strength to keep going. Just comment with the number 1, and then listen to what I did next. As I drove home from the grocery store, my mind was racing. Cheryl's words echoed in my ears, "A new baby is the fastest way to prove that." The phrase unlocked a memory I had buried so deep it was practically fossilized. A painful, shameful secret that wasn't even mine, but one that I had carried the weight of for years. It was from more than 20 years ago. After Meredith was born, we had tried for a third child. For 3 years, we tried. I went through invasive tests, charted my cycles, and cried every month when my period arrived. The doctors ran every test imaginable and always came to the same conclusion: there's nothing wrong with you, Brenda. It's just unexplained. I blamed myself. I carried that failure like a heavy stone in my heart, the quiet, persistent feeling that my body had let my family down. Years later, after Russell's father passed away, we were up late one night, and he had a rare moment of drunken, maudlin honesty. He confessed something to me that night that had rocked the foundation of my trust in him. He told me that during that difficult time, he had gone, secretly, to a urologist and had his own fertility tested. He never told me. The results, he admitted, had shown severely compromised fertility. The doctor had told him that while not impossible, it would be a near miracle for him to father another child naturally. He had let me carry the blame for all those years. He let me believe I was the broken one because he was too ashamed, too proud to admit his own failure. The betrayal was so profound that I had just packed it away. It was one lie among a growing pile, and I didn't have the strength to deal with it then. But now, that painful secret felt like a gift. It was a perfectly polished, karmic weapon that had just been handed to me. The next morning, I made a phone call I hadn't made in years. Dr. Martinez, our old family physician, was retired now, living in a small town a few hours away. I found his number online. He sounded surprised but pleased to hear from me. We chatted for a few minutes about his grandchildren and my kids. Then I got to the point. "Dr. Martinez," I said, my voice steady. "I know this is an unusual request, and I know all about patient confidentiality. But I need to ask you a hypothetical question regarding Russell's medical history." There was a cautious pause. "Okay, Brenda. Hypothetically, I began, if a patient had a fertility test done, say, 24 years ago, would a record of that test still exist somewhere in his archived medical file?" The pause was longer this time. I could hear him thinking. "Hypothetically," he said slowly, "medical records are legally required to be maintained for a very long time. So yes, hypothetically, that record would almost certainly still exist. And hypothetically," I continued, my heart starting to beat a little faster, "if a court of law, as part of a formal divorce proceeding, were to subpoena a patient's complete medical history, would your old practice be legally obligated to provide everything in that archived file?" "Hypothetically," Dr. Martinez said, and I could hear a faint smile in his voice, "we would have no choice but to comply fully with a court order." "Thank you, doctor," I said. That's all I needed to know. My next call was to Clayton. "Clayton," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound confidence. "I have a special request. We need to amend our discovery request. I want to subpoena Russell's complete medical history, going all the way back to the beginning of our marriage." There was a moment of silence on his end. "Brenda," he said carefully. "That's a broad request. May I ask what we're looking for?" "Let's just say," I replied, a slow smile spreading across my face, "that I have a strong suspicion that my soon-to-be ex-husband is about to commit fraud in a family court proceeding. And I think I have the proof." Clayton, being the brilliant shark that he was, moved with incredible speed. Within a week, a judge had signed the subpoena. The timing was almost poetic. Russell and Cheryl, in their desperate rush to create their new family unit, had planned a small, quick wedding for a Saturday afternoon in June. The all-important custody hearing for Cheryl was scheduled for the very next Monday. She would be walking into that courtroom as a newly married woman, hoping to present a picture of domestic bliss and future motherhood to the judge. I spent that Saturday morning in my garden. The sun was warm on my back, and the scent of freshly turned earth filled the air. I was planting a new bed of roses, digging my hands into the dirt, feeling grounded and peaceful. I didn't feel vengeful or angry. I felt serene. I was simply a force of nature, allowing events to unfold as they were meant to. My phone rang at precisely 4:30 p.m. It was Meredith. She had, against her better judgment but fueled by a morbid curiosity she undoubtedly inherited from me, decided to attend the wedding. Her voice was trembling, but not with sadness. It was trembling with suppressed, hysterical laughter. "Mom," she managed to get out between gasps. "Oh, my God, Mom. You are not going to believe what just happened." "Try me," I said, sinking down onto my garden bench. Meredith painted a glorious picture. Clayton had arranged for a licensed court courier to deliver the subpoenaed medical records. The courier, a stern-looking man in a formal suit, had walked into the bridal suite where Cheryl was having the final touches put on her hair and makeup. He had handed her a thick, legally sealed envelope marked urgent, by order of the court. Cheryl, according to Meredith who was watching from the hallway, had snatched the envelope, assuming it was some last-minute legal harassment from her ex-husband. She tore it open. Meredith described watching as Cheryl's face cycled through a series of stunning emotions. First, confusion as she looked at the unfamiliar medical letterhead. Then, dawning comprehension as she read the results of a fertility test from 24 years ago. Then, pale, horrified realization. And finally, a shade of crimson rage that Meredith said she had never seen on a human being before. She read the cold, clinical report that detailed Russell's severely compromised fertility. The report that made her entire plan, her entire reason for this sham marriage, an utter impossibility. By the time Russell arrived at the venue, beaming in his ill-fitting tuxedo, ready to claim his bride, it was all over. Cheryl had ripped off her veil, stormed out of the bridal suite in her wedding dress, and left. She hadn't even spoken to him. She just left the open envelope on the vanity table, the damning report lying on top of a pile of discarded hairpins. "She's gone, Mom," Meredith said, finally letting out a full-throated laugh. "She literally left him at the altar. Dad is just standing there in the empty banquet hall, surrounded by flowers and uneaten hors d'oeuvres. The wedding is off. It's over." I closed my eyes, tilting my face up to the warm afternoon sun. "That's a real shame," I said, my voice laced with an irony so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Mom," Meredith said, her voice suddenly suspicious. "Those medical records, you wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "Your father's private medical history is his own business," I said, and every word was the truth. If he chose not to share crucial information with his fiancée before asking her to marry him, well, that sounds like a personal problem between the two of them. That evening, Forrest and Meredith came over. We didn't talk about Russell or Cheryl. We sat on the front porch, opened a bottle of expensive champagne I'd been saving, and watched the sunset paint the sky in glorious shades of victory. We were home. We were together. And we were finally free. The autumn leaves were turning again, blanketing the lawn in shades of gold and crimson, when the invitation arrived. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the script elegant and joyful. It was the announcement for Forrest and his fiancée Sarah's engagement party. Sarah was a brilliant architect, a kind, funny woman who made my son laugh in a way that reminded me of when he was a little boy. Holding the beautiful invitation in my hands, I felt a wave of profound, peaceful happiness. The world had righted itself. It had been nearly 2 years since that Thanksgiving apocalypse. The house, once the scene of a devastating betrayal, had become my sanctuary. I had painted the living room a soft, calming sage green. Russell's old, dark office, a room I had always hated, was now my sunny reading nook, filled with thriving plants and stacks of books. The very air in the house felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had finally exhaled. My life was my own now, in a way it never had been before. My weeks had a new rhythm. On Wednesdays, I volunteered at a women's shelter downtown, using my own hard-won experience to help other women navigate the treacherous legal waters of a difficult divorce. My friendship with Clayton, my lawyer, had quietly, unexpectedly, blossomed into something more. It wasn't a fiery passion, but a slow-burning ember of companionship, built on a foundation of mutual respect and easy laughter. We had dinner once a week. It was nice. It felt like a possibility. Russell's life, I had heard through the grapevine, had taken a very different path. After the wedding debacle, his personal and professional life had completely imploded. He lost his high-paying job. The official reason was corporate restructuring, but the truth was that the story of his spectacular personal failure had become common knowledge, shattering his reputation for reliability. Cheryl had vanished, presumably moving out of state after her custody battle failed. Russell was now working as a freelance consultant, living alone in that same sad studio apartment, a ghost of the powerful man he once thought he was. Then, last month, he had done something I never expected. He had called me. It was the first time we had spoken directly since the divorce was finalized. His voice was smaller than I remembered, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Brenda," he'd said, his voice hesitant. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. But I saw the engagement announcement. Will you be at Forrest's party? Of course I will, Russell, I'd replied, surprised by his question. He's my son. There was a long pause. I want to come, too, he'd said, his voice barely a whisper. But I won't if it makes you uncomfortable. I know I lost the right to be there. But I would like to try and rebuild some kind of relationship with my children. The old Brenda might have savored that moment, might have used it to deliver one final, crushing blow. But I wasn't that woman anymore. My happiness no longer depended on his suffering. Forrest and Meredith are adults, Russell, I'd told him, my voice even. Their relationship with you is their choice to make. I will not be the reason you can't try to repair what you broke. At the party, held at a beautiful old country club, I watched him from a distance. He looked lost and out of place in his old suit, a little grayer, a little thinner. I watched as Forrest, with Sarah by his side, walked over to him. I saw them talk, my son's expression not one of forgiveness, but of a calm, adult grace. I saw Meredith join them, polite but not warm. They were making their own choices, and I was proud of them. Later that evening, Clayton found me on the terrace, overlooking the rolling green hills of the golf course. He handed me a glass of champagne. How are you holding up? He asked, his eyes kind. I took a sip, the bubbles fizzing on my tongue. I looked back through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the celebration inside. I saw my two beautiful children, happy and thriving. I saw the man who had hurt me so deeply, standing on the periphery, a lonely figure in a joyful room. And I felt nothing. No anger, no bitterness. Just peace. I'm better than fine, Clayton, I said, turning to look at the horizon. I'm good. Genuinely good. The woman who had sat at that Thanksgiving table 2 years ago had been terrified of losing everything she had built. The woman standing on this terrace now understood that sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find out what you truly have. And what I had now was a life built not on illusions, but on my own strength. A future that was bright with promise, and entirely, wonderfully, my own. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight your way out of the darkness and back into the light, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What was the moment in my story that made you cheer the loudest? Your stories and your support mean more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we all have stories worth telling.